money comes in such erratic, weird ways when you're a comedian. Some gigs don't pay you for months. Other things come in dribs and drabs. My income's always been quite complicated because of the number of things I do. But certainly as a comedian, I started to realise quite quickly, right, I've moved to London, I'm renting a place, I am in the adult world now. The period of just stuffing the 100 quid in my pocket and then, as you say, giving most of it to the landlady and then the rest of it is a supermarket shop, that had to end quite quickly.
Hello and welcome to the Mouthy Money podcast. I'm delighted to welcome you all here. As the eagle-eyed among you will have noticed watching on YouTube and on Spotify, Ed is still away on his paternity leave, and so we have arranged for the fantastic Vix Leyton to come on and help us guest edit this episode of the pod. Hi, Vix.
Hey, good to be back.
Fantastic. And we have a very special guest with us today, Mark Watson, who is a stand-up comedian. I'm sure all of you will recognise him from the great work that he's done. You've seen him on the telly and all over those other kind of great places where you watch stand-up. And he's also a co-director and head of a production company called Impatient Productions, which is going to be relevant to today's conversation. Hi, Mark.
Nice to be here. Nice to meet you.
A pleasure, an absolute pleasure. Those of you who watched our previous episode with Vix as our guest editor saw that we had a good conversation about budgeting, about working together on that sort of thing, but also got quite deep into sort of the economics of the creative industries, didn't we, Vix?
Yeah, we did. And it's a lot of free work, I think. And this is not simply resigned to comedy. This is true of pretty much any creative job where there's a lot of competition to get in. But with someone like stand-up, Mark, obviously you're a telecomedian. You're a millionaire now, right? I just need to keep working.
Billionaire, yeah. I'm rich enough that people on social media call me immoral and things like that.
Because you have only ever been a stand-up comedian, well, alongside about 20 other side hustles, but apart from a brief spell in Waitrose, drawing from the shows of yours I've seen, you pretty much left uni and went into this as your real job.
Yeah, I was able to do that by, basically, as you've mentioned, essentially doing 4 or 5 years with absolutely the bare minimum of money that a person can live off. I also did do various other stuff while I was trying to break into comedy, like tuition and temping, this and that. But also I got lucky quite early in my career. I managed to sell a treatment for a sitcom script to a production company. It never went anywhere. And it was, my experience of the 20 years that followed is that none of these things ever go anywhere. But and also it wasn't very much money, but it was a couple of months rent in London. That allowed me to basically move to London. I lived for the first few years as a comedian by just about making enough that I could continue to be in London. I don't know if it's quite the same now, but there was a perception. I mean, I think in some ways the perception is still there. Certainly I felt like I needed to be in London to get the number of gigs in that I needed in order to establish myself. People start out in comedy from all sorts of different areas now, as they always have. I was kind of I'd say, I mean, it is, you joke about it. It is a misconception that if you have done any TV or even been on the radio or are known to anyone, you are very, very rich. That applies across not just comedy, but all of entertainment, I think. But it is certainly true that before I had any sort of profile on TV or radio or any of it, like every club comic, I was basically just about getting by and looking to, I mean, you'd get paid in cash in those days, almost always. So it was literally a case of coming away from a gig with sort of 100 quid and then at the end of the week, adding all those up and putting it straight into the hands of a landlady who would knock on the door. That was how I lived for the first, and I think they always say 4 or 5 years is about what it takes to establish yourself as any sort of pro comedian. There are some exceptions, but basically, if you want to break into stand-up, or yes, most forms of the arts, you use the phrase yourself, free work is going to come. Or if not free work, there's lots of gigs that are, 50 to 100 quid, but it will cost you pretty much that to get there and back, or to stay there or whatever. So you certainly are running at a loss for a while. And as you also know, Vix, quite quickly, you work out whether this is for you or whether you would rather put your skills and qualification into some more obvious form of income.
So how do you deal with finances? So that is basically being a freelancer from the word go. So at what point did you think, I've got to do some grown-up stuff here? Because I think it's very easy when you're in the creative industries to live week for week, to count your pounds at the end of the week and go, okay, this goes to the landlord and this is my beer money, like sort of almost studenty lifestyle.
It was, yeah, it was quite like that for the first few years. And then when I started to make a decent amount of money, or at least like enough that it was worth talking about tax and stuff, my then agent, not all of their advice was good, but they did say get an accountant and take things like VAT and so forth seriously. Well, yeah, I think when I was forced to register for VAT, that probably was a turning point. I started to realize that tax would overshadow more of my life than I previously thought. And I'll go on record since I'm on a money podcast and say I understand the fiscal reasons for it, but VAT is the biggest pain ever devised by mankind. It's a nice problem. I realize it's a luxury problem, but even people that aren't registered, all it does, in my opinion, is cause problems. But anyway, once I got an accountant and they started talking about tax and things, I had again been just kind of bluffing my way through the tax return for, I guess, but there wasn't much to account for. 5 to 10 years in, I started to realize that I was going to have to pay attention to budgeting, not least because, as you know, again, money comes in such erratic, weird ways when you're a comedian. Some gigs don't pay you for months. Other things come in dribs and drabs. My income's always been quite complicated because of the number of things I do, but certainly as a comedian, I started to realize quite quickly, right, I've moved to London, I'm renting a place, I am in the adult world now. The period of just stuffing the 100 quid in my pocket and then, as you say, giving most of it to the landlady and then the rest of it is a supermarket shop, that had to end quite quickly. So I think from my mid to late 20s on, I've been reasonably kind of cautious money manager. But that said, there's always nasty surprises when you do something like we do, because it is very hard to, I sometimes envy people who are paid, in like either their taxes immediately deducted at source, or even just they know exactly how much money they're going to have every month and every year, basically. There are loads of pros to not having that life, but it must be way more relaxing if you basically at any point can put your finger on exactly how much money you've got and will get.
Yeah. So, because you've got kids as well, and did that make you think maybe I should look at getting a 9-to-5 job? Because that is obviously a huge, huge financial shift when you're responsible for tiny lives. You've done a good job. They're both still alive. Well done.
They're both still alive. They've both got clothes on. Yeah. And in fact, regularly the older one texts me to ask for cash codes that you can get from a cash machine to like take a tenner out, because he has a bank account now, but he never seems to have the card, so I'm always getting emergency cash. So yeah, I've raised the kids well enough that they're now sort of sponging off me quite confidently. I think the thing is, by the time my son was born, I was 30 and I had established myself as a comedian, so I was kind of already in too deep then. Well, I certainly did think about getting a 9-to-5. Very few comedians are ever more than a few bad weeks away from thinking about a 9-to-5 job. But I do think the coming of the kids definitely made me more paranoid that I'd run out of money, and more kind of, more vigilant. But still, it isn't easy. How, like, this year, I, as usual, went through everything, all my bank statements, and calculated in my head what I thought my tax would be before my accountant's email came in, and it was pretty much on the money, no pun intended. But that's almost the first year I've been right. No matter how hard I try to account, I'm normally out in some way. And as I've heard people say before, you very rarely have more money than you think. If you're going to underestimate it or overestimate it, you're probably over. So yeah, I'd say like being a parent of young kids and now teenage kids has certainly made me, because also, I mean, people talk about how expensive it is to have children. A lot of the time it's not really. A lot of the costs are modest as they go along. But as you say, it does mean the phrase dependence is quite frightening when you put it on forms, put it that way.
Would you recommend a career in the arts, knowing what you know at the moment? So the cost of living crisis has been a nightmare. I think Edinburgh Fringe demonstrated to me in an incredibly acute way just how little people have got, because a lot of the people that I normally see that come to my show every year were messaging me saying, we've looked at it, we just can't afford it. It's the accommodation costs are ridiculous. The train costs are ridiculous. Are we gonna, because the UK, we value and we pride ourselves on this brilliant comedy legacy that we've got. Are we at risk of losing that, do you think?
Yeah.
Because it ebbs and flows, obviously, but it feels this year particularly.
Yeah, it does. I mean, the first question you asked was, would I recommend someone quits a proper job for a career in the arts? I really, I can't do that wholeheartedly in the current climate. I did with you, obviously, but even then, pre-COVID, I mean, 2019 feels an awfully different age in some ways, given how recent it actually is. But the thing is, I also wouldn't ever discourage anyone from parking what they're doing if it doesn't satisfy them. Or I think that if you want to be a comedian or a writer or any other branch of the arts and you're prepared to take the risk, I'd never discourage anyone from doing that. But is important to be realistic. Certainly with comedy, you and I had this conversation quite a lot. There's a lot of good comedians who are only just making enough. So, and that's not to say if you start out that you're not going to be a good comedian. But as I say, when I was starting, it was at least 3 or 4 years of quite a lot of sacrifice. And that was probably a golden age income wise, at least compared with now. It was before the global financial crisis. It was before all of the upheavals we've had. So like, I don't know what the financial picture was globally in like 2005, but I bet it was rosier than now. So for sure, it's not a great time to be taking any sort of risk. But still, I would always suggest that anyone gave it a go if it is what makes them excited. You can always go back to doing a job, I guess. The bigger question of whether we're in danger of losing what we've got is, I mean, yeah, it's interesting. In a way, stand-up has sort of survived a little bit better than I thought. The cost of living crisis and Edinburgh, of course, is an exception. The Fringe is so expensive and so wildly out of proportion with everything that it's absolutely true what you say, that year on year that is taking more. Well, I say taking more hits. It's self-inflicted hits basically. But the comedy scene in general is still kind of quite buoyant. I don't know. I'm sure there are people running smaller nights who would say it's been a massive struggle. Theatre audiences and like my touring crowds and things are still fairly kind of at the level that they were a few years ago. I mean, there is a perception that in a cost of living crisis, I've heard people, at least, again, I'm not a financial analyst, but I've heard people say that in a cost of living crisis, luxuries like entertainment sort of go less quickly than you'd think because you've got to have something to distract you. You've got to have some kind of outlet. And I think stand-up's useful for that because, well, like my theatre tour tickets are 20, 25 quid or something. It's not wildly expensive compared with like theatre. I can only imagine the West End has been quite badly hit by the cost of living crisis, unless it's all tourist and it's another thing entirely. But yeah, at least with comedy, it exists in a kind of hinterland where you can have quite a good night out for, I mean, 20, 25 quid that's a tour show. You can go to good club nights for a tenner or something.
Or bad ones, if you
Or
want.
for that matter, absolutely awful ones, yeah.
People are like, why is this free? It's like, oh, you'll discover it very quickly.
Yeah, sometimes you don't know until you're in the front row and it's too late then.
But I think, yeah, from my point of view, because I obviously do a lot more of those kind of smaller gigs because I'm not on telly. I set up a gig in Sheffield and initially it was on a Monday night. Now pubs love comedy on a Monday night because nobody wants to come to the pub on a Monday. It's the quietest day. So you put comedy on, you get, even if it's a handful of people putting money over the bar, it's worth having because you just need a microphone and an amp. Ideally, some places don't provide those. You just have to improvise, but it's cheap to run and a lot of comedians will work for free. Even your big names like Mark will come and do potentially like new material nights where you can under the radar test some jokes so people don't have to pay for you to kind of learn on the job. I set up this gig on a Monday night. It was doing pretty well. Then the pub got in touch with me. They said, we're not going to open now on Monday and Tuesday. We're only going to open Wednesday to Saturday.
Yeah.
Wednesday's a tougher night in general to get people to choose comedy because we're going towards the weekend, and they weren't willing to close the pub just for comedy because they didn't want to miss out on any extra revenue from people who are passing by. So we moved to Wednesday. Then they changed the opening hours. So they still weren't earning enough money. So then they changed the opening hours. So it was only open till 9 o'clock on the weekdays. So we had to do this speed run of comedy of like, it has to start at 7. We can't really afford a break because we've got to get everybody on. So the will was there. The comedy was there. But this venue now pretty much only opens Friday, Saturday, Sunday.
You start to feel the pub itself is the problem here a bit.
And it feels like, well, it's not just that pub, it's hospitality everywhere. It's like a lot of pubs don't open in Sheffield on a Monday or Tuesday now. A lot of the smaller restaurants can't afford to be open. This sort of, the will is there, but the businesses aren't there to support it.
Yeah, hospitality is taking a battering. And as you say, that does impact upon us because you've got to put the shows on somewhere. And yeah, obviously comedy thrives like any performance art in a climate where there is generally kind of vibrant nightlife. People have got money to spend. So yeah, it is sort of a troubling time for the industry. But I think, again, I feel relatively fortunate because, and this is a slightly different point, I suppose, but musicians are being really screwed by people streaming. Most of their income comes from live touring now, but they just can't do as many gigs as we can. And there's much more hassle being a musician as well. You know, the same, again, theatre has enormous running costs. So at least comedy is kind of quite mobile. You know, we can set a gig up nearly anywhere. You can sell tickets nearly anywhere. But nonetheless, I think the overriding point is it would be really good if the cost of living crisis wasn't happening. But I imagine that point will have come up in the podcast before.
Yeah, because you do a lot of corporate events as well. So I've seen you, I've
Yeah.
personally seen you at a few of these corporate events. Have you seen a tightening of the budget from the sort of corporate side since the sort of cost of living crisis kicked in?
I'd say if there has been a tightening of budgets, the sort of person that benefits is me, because I'm maybe getting gigs which would have gone to a slightly higher ticket commission a few years ago. I certainly set my corporate price a bit lower a couple of years ago because of this, because I started to think, I'd rather be competitive. I would say that there's been some kind of, a lot of events used to have an MC and then a comedian. Maybe now often that's just one, all under one umbrella. Again, I'm not complaining because sometimes I am that umbrella, so it's fine. But what's odd about I suppose what's odd about business and, well, business in general is, if I'm honest, I wouldn't say, like, there was obviously a bouncing back period right after COVID where the vibe was, oh, we're lucky to be getting together at all. And that I hosted some pretty modest gatherings then. But now at the end of 2025, I'd say the vibe at the average corporate event is sort of identical to what it was 7 or 8 years ago. I think that's because part of these events obviously are about showing that you still have money, that you as a business are buoyant.
Keeping up appearances.
Your appearance is showing to the client that you can afford to do this, either that or there some sort of tax write-off or something. I suppose I don't want to bite the hand that feeds me. But I think most of it is about appearances. I think, like, if you've always hosted an event for 500 people, there's black tie and, three-course meal, everything, and that's the sort of face of your industry, then you kind of have to keep doing that. So you wouldn't know from business events that I've been to that anything is different, except that almost every event I do starts with the CEO or someone doing a speech about how well they've done, like, despite the circumstances or in these difficult times, or there's a lot of caveats in the CEO's speeches these days, basically. But almost every industry turns out to be the exception. They'll always say, we're struggling very hard, and yet, thanks to the amazing work of the people in this room, I've heard about 6 different sections of industry be credited with keeping the UK economy alive in the past couple of months.
Because how much do you engage with that out and about? So do you keep an eye on, like, did you know what was going on in the autumn statement? Did you feel like you had to know about that?
Yeah. I suppose I engage it the way that a normal member of the public does. I don't keep a special eye on it for businesses' sake, because, other than, I suppose, I do take an interest in whether it looks like a business is likely to go under if I'm booked by them in the next few weeks. But probably, like some people listening to the podcast, I find economics above a certain level quite bewildering. I listened to quite a lot of debate around the budget. I didn't really come away with feeling like I understood much of what I could see, both pro and con in almost every new policy suggested. So I basically I think probably like a lot of people, I wait and see how much tax I have to pay, and then I decide how things are going based on that.
Just vibes.
Yeah, I suppose I'm politically engaged with it in the sense that, broadly speaking, like most people that I know, I'm in favour of higher taxes and wealth taxes and so on. Even if wealth tax wouldn't affect me, nor would a mansion tax. But the principle of taxing higher the more people earn seems pretty sound to me. But even then, and the idea that if loads of millionaires flocked out of the country, that would be really bad for us, I don't think really stands up. But again, I haven't done the maths on that. I just sort of instinctively feel that people don't need to be too rich, and we shouldn't pander to them too much.
And then, so sort of getting back to the should you or shouldn't you do this kind of job, what would you recommend to people who are considering making their hobby or making their sort of passion project into your career? Have you got any kind of, what questions should they ask themselves? What should they definitely not do?
This is the thing.
Is there anything you wish you'd known when you were starting out?
Well, I was going to say that I wish I'd known how much resilience there'd be involved, like how many times you get back at 2 a.m. from a gig, having taken a sort of combination of 3 trains and then still had to spend £20 on a taxi, or otherwise you're sleeping in the street. But actually, I think I sort of did know that. I feel like if you're drawn to doing stand-up comedy seriously, then you're probably not in the dark about how much travel and hardship there will be. Also, how much you'll get knocked back. I suppose I don't know if I wish I'd known that, but it is worth saying you have to have a really, I was going to say a thick skin where rejection is concerned, but I don't think I have, and I wouldn't say you have either. Thick skin is...
I can remember every mean thing that anyone's ever said to me.
I know very few comedians with a genuinely thick skin, or artists of any kind. So I'll rephrase it. You just have to accept you're gonna get sort of beaten around quite a bit by the industry.
Because you're also an author as well, and that process is bewildering to me. You'll start a book, and then 5 years later, it's out in the world.
Yeah, and actually being an author, oddly, you sort of, well, I don't know if it's to do with cost of living or anything. Reading fiction has come to feel like a real luxury for a lot of people. I mean, hardbacks you don't think of as being that expensive. It is still like $14.99 or something, and that's the format, unfortunately, that my book normally comes out in. My novel this year came out. I'd much rather we went straight to paperback. I think the whole institution of the hardback has sort of had its day in an era of ebooks
Kindle.
and Kindle and plus audiobooks and all of it. But still, it does mean that the first form of a novel of mine to hit the shelves is somewhere between 12 and 15 quid, and Amazon then like plays havoc with it by making books p for a month or whatever. So the book market is pretty screwed, and I don't know if that's to do with economic downturn or it would happen anyway for loads of reasons, including people's short attention spans, 24-hour streamable TV. But certainly with both books and comedy and anything I can think of creative now, you have got to be you've got to be extremely, you've really, really got to want it. You've got to be very tenacious. I suppose the flip side is, though, I'd like to offer hope. Compared with when I started, you also can generate much more than for yourself, because if you're good at the internet, if you're good at making videos, or we can all name comedians who've carved out careers principally without leaving their home, which was not a thing in 2005. So but if you're not one of those people, what you're hoping to do is just get gigs and keep working and work your way up and see if that makes you financially solvent. As I say, I would absolutely not discourage anyone from doing that, but I would recommend, for a start, well, I was going to say talking to other comedians about it, but they'll all tell you not to do it. Probably because they are either quite beaten down themselves, especially at this time of year, or don't want talented new people entering the gene pool.
The ladder's coming up. They're like, no, no, thank you.
Try and talk to honest comedians about what it's like, but also ones without some sort of agenda, if you can find anyone in that category.
Because, not to add to the list of things that you're doing, you also do a lot of podcasting. So you had a men's mental health podcast for a while. That's another example, because I guess younger people are coming in now going, right, I know what job I want. I want to be a podcaster. I want to be a YouTuber. I want to do this. It's a slow burn, isn't it? On all of these things. For every overnight success.
It really is, yeah. My son is 15, nearly 16, and a lot of kids his age want to be, as you say, influencers, creators. These are the sort of phrases you now hear, and it's difficult to argue with them in a way, because the people they see who are doing that are multimillionaires, and very often they're people I've never heard of, but you look them up and it turns out that they've had 25 billion views, and so for sure that is quite an aspirational area. But I think building a podcast it certainly is a slow burn. You have to be able to make it in bulk, as everyone here knows, and you have to be quite patient. Ironically, the only people that don't need to be patient setting up podcasts are people who already are famous and don't need to do a podcast, which has been remarked on by almost every podcaster, I think.
No, thank you. We're full.
Yeah, you already do loads. You are already very successful. Please leave us alone.
So, Mark, if you could give us one bit of financial advice, because this is going to go out at the end of the year, I think, what would your advice be?
My financial advice to comedians or aspiring comedians would definitely be any money you spend on an accountant or some sort of advisor is well worth doing. And also, comedy is one of the most hard to account for things possible, especially if you're doing several different things like I am. And well, my financial advice in general would be, this is actually probably goes counter to most good financial advice, but I was talking to my son recently about how we had to get a new bathroom put in because it just all gone wrong. Suddenly the shower was leaking into the plasterboard, and I told him what it cost to get quite a small bathroom installed, and my son was sort of staggered by it. And I said, this is the thing, most of the big spends in life are things that you don't even want or are reluctant to buy, but without it your life will get worse. Like a new boiler or a bathroom in this case. Or one thing I said to my son is, if you're ever agonizing over spending 20 or 30 quid on something or that you actually want, that's a luxury, I always think you might as well do it while you've got money, because life will suck up all your money into miserable things if you don't. So again, that's a luxury position. If you haven't got the 20 or 30 quid in the first place, don't do that. But where possible, my philosophy is enjoy what money you have, at least use some of it to get nice things that make you happier, because sooner or later something's going to come for you and to take the rest of it anyway, and you won't even be happy about it.
Yeah, I think that's quite a pragmatic approach. I don't like the kind of financial advice that suggests you can buy a house in 20 years, but you've got to live in a shoe for the next 20 years and eat only rice.
Discredited, yeah. The whole give up your espressos thing, it seems like nonsense. There are good reasons why people can't buy a house, and it's nothing to do with how much avocado and toast they're consuming. I think most people outside of the newspapers know.
Because you mentioned your son there. What do you teach kids now from a finance point of view? Because obviously they're bringing it in. I don't know if you heard the government have said they've got to start teaching money in schools.
Yeah, I agree with that policy. I think that is one good thing that this government has done, or at least talked about doing. I know that some teachers have said it's not as easy as that to modify but I definitely, when I look back at my 5 years of maths, I understand that some of the application of it is useful in everyday life. But I did come away with it from school with no understanding of mortgages or tax or any of it. I think most people do, unless you've done a business degree or something. Even coming out of university, I couldn't have told you much about any aspect of practical finance. It's funny because at school, economics was the subject people did if they were bad at languages. It was seen as like, okay, you can't do German or Russian or French, we'll give you economics. But actually, that was almost certainly more useful than both of my modern language A-levels.
It's a modern international language in itself, isn't it?
Exactly.
It's like, it's crucial, yeah.
It was always sold as like, if you really can't do languages, you can just do these lessons about how to save money in the supermarket or something. But then, even in my 20s, as soon as there was the first big financial crash, I remember thinking all those guys that did economics as a supposedly soft GCSE they're the ones that are now fine. And all of us with arts degrees aren't. So I think there should be more, however they do it, more practical economics woven into the school curriculum, definitely, because it's a hell of a lot more useful doing that than, I know it's easy to say, but I mean, I quite enjoyed doing algebra. I enjoyed the academic exercise. Some maths is worth it for its own sake, just as in the same way that all subjects have things that are not that practical, but it's still good for your brain, good for your development. But for sure, it's mad that you don't really know what tax is when you're 18, because you soon will know.
Yeah.
Sometimes by the time you learn, it's quite an unpleasant surprise.
Yeah, it's often too late to do the right stuff. But,
truly.
So what are you looking forward to next year?
Well, obviously, being a billionaire, I'm just going to sort of sit back and enjoy it the way I have done this year.
Any plans to go into space, Mark? Or
no, I think that for me would be a poor use of money. I actually am. I've always been very interested in space, and I loved all the stuff. The space race, the moon landings, and the space campaigns of the 70s are all kind of strong areas of interest for me. But I do not wish to be one of these people that becomes a space tourist, largely because I don't really like flying that much. From what I read about what it's like going in a spaceship, it's the takeoff and landing are quite a lot worse than they would be on an airline. Also, I mean, that Katy Perry flight was like 15 minutes or something. That doesn't seem like it can be value for money to me.
15 minutes too long with Katy Perry in a personal view, but there we go. So
what if you do it and then you are in with Katy Perry? I suppose I could chat to her for 15 minutes, but not if I was screaming because we just left orbit. I think if it's much cheaper to just go to Greece, but for a week rather than 15 minutes, I think that represents more solid value, probably.
You can't even go to Manchester from London for like less than 300 quid, though. So I think economic space travel is probably a bit outside of our lifetime.
That's right. I don't actually know how much those people pay, but if it's anything like, maybe it is like the trains, and if you sign up early, you can get slightly cheaper.
Yeah, if it's delayed, you can claw some of the money back.
Yeah, a website comes on and you get 50% of your space money back.
And where can we find you? Because you've got a book, because we've sort of talked about sort of financial mistakes. You've got a book that basically just covers some of the like worst hits that you've ever had that I refer back to quite regularly. So if people are new to you, I would recommend that as a great starting book as an author. Yes, that's called
Mortification. It's mostly not about financial mistakes. No. It's just about terrible mistakes and regrets in general.
But you just generally cover off like, well, talking about, I think, and this is the thing that we've sort of covered in the last 2 episodes of Mouthy Money that Chris does a brilliant job when I'm not here, is just having these conversations, like hearing somebody that you respect, who's done incredibly well in the field that you hope to do well in, be really honest about the ups and the downs in terms of your sort of creative projects, some of them that got almost all the way to the finish line, didn't pan out. It's
certainly if you're a writer or a comedian or anything, a big danger you can fall into is starting to think that a project's going to come off. And, everyone has done it, but mentally spending that money even before you've got it. So then it is a real punch in the guts if it turns out it's not happening. Again, I think everyone at times thinks, I've got that money coming in, and then they're wrong. But again, the field we work in is particularly bad for this because sometimes I've had gigs for like large amounts of money where it's a corporate thing and they say, are you free to do it? They name a large fee. You say yes. They say, right, we'll get back to you. And you know that they're just offering you on a list of other people. And then eventually they say, we've gone with someone else, which is fine. But again, for that 48 hours, you did sort of have that amount of money in your head that you were maybe about to earn. So yeah, last minute tip for comedians is when you do get to the level where you're earning doing quite generously paid gigs, still, you haven't got that money until it's in your account.
I had one of the worst things that's happened to me this year, and it's a tiny, tiny thing, was I used to work at CarWow and I had share options at CarWow, and I left the job and I didn't really follow the administration as to what was happening there. They sent me in error a link to their share portal, and in that brief moment I thought I must have bought the shares, and CarWow's doing incredibly well.
That's horrible.
I rang my girlfriend. I was like, oh my God, funny story. I must have taken the share options at CarWow. It doesn't sound like something I would do. That's not very, it's a bit sensible for me. But I was like trying to calculate them, went back to my offer letter. I was like, I knew exactly how many I had. Even if I just have that money in terms of the allocation, that's loads, that is. I was so excited. And then it was an error.
Yeah.
So, that was a roller coaster for an hour for me. That was. But yeah, if you have share options and you think the business is doing well, buy him.
I'm not going to, I won't say from whom, but I got paid a chunk of money last year that was sort of residual royalties type for something. And it's been more than a year, but I still think it might have been a mistake. I think it was too much. I can't understand it. There's a bit of money that I basically that I've always earmarked as this is not quite real, just in case it turns out to have been a mistake. But as I say, that's well over a year. So there must come a point where you can just say, well, you can't have it back now because that's your fault.
I've spent it.
But I don't know.
There we go. So you've counterbalanced my harrowing disappointment with a surprise windfall that you may or may not have been entitled to. So the world balances that way, doesn't it?
Occasionally, the world gives you something bad, but you never. Once you've had the misfortune, you never trust that you're having the good bits. Yeah.
Well, that's an uplifting note to end the podcast on.
Sensible, yeah. Enjoy surprise money when it comes in, but also be prepared that it might be too good to be true. That's not just about money, that's just life, isn't it?
I love the concept of surprise money as well. I'm going to be looking around corners now, hoping that I get accosted by a £50 note.
It doesn't happen often.
Delay repay has been my surprise money. December, I'm not getting paid till the 31st of December. And it was looking pretty bleak, but then a load of delay repay claims came through and I've made £300 and that's paying for my Christmas presents. Thank you, Unreliable
Rail. That's unbelievable. Yeah, that's what you need.
The only cost is my time and my disappointment.
I think, I mean, delay repay should be surprise money, but as we've discussed, Vix, it's almost got to the level where you buy your ticket expecting to see most of that money back these days.
Yeah, it's you sit there and it gets past 15 minutes. You're like, good news, free travel. Bad news, probably not going to get where I'm supposed to go.
All of my plans ruined. Yeah.
Yeah, sorry, Mum, not coming to 70th, but I will get £136 back. So it swings and roundabouts. But, well, thank you so much for coming to chat to us, Mark. This has been a real treat. Where can we find you if we want more of this?
As you said, I do quite a lot of different things. So the best thing is if you just Google Mark Watson, it'll probably be me that comes up. There are a few of us, but it should be me. So yeah, that's the simplest way.
Cool. So we will look out for you on tour quite extensively next year.
Plenty of touring, but also there are some gaps. I'll be doing plenty of other things. So one way or another, I will try as usual to enter your lives.
And you've also got a murder mystery podcast that I've just started listening to, and I absolutely love. So
yes, that's what. Yeah, do look for that if you want to find one thing, because I'm currently immersed in that, in the work of that, and I'm really enjoying it, and it seems to be going well.
It's like a murder mystery radio play. It is brilliant. So that is a personal recommendation from me.
And very nice to talk to.
But thanks for having me on, Chris, actually. This has been a real treat.
No, it's been my pleasure having you both on. Thank you so much for your time. Yeah, I've learned a lot there about the realities of working in the creative industries and what you guys have to put up with. I think, as a consumer of the creative work that you guys do, it is somewhat galling that you're not being rewarded that way enough for, and I think it's something we do need to look at. Because if many a time I've gone out for a stand-up comedy evening when I need to kind of cheer myself up or get myself in a better frame of mind, and things like the Comedy Store is incredibly good value for, for what you pay for that in Central London, places like that. So more power to both of your elbows on that front. I really hope that it continues to be an option for me to enjoy myself. But with that, I hope you both have a fantastic 2026. And thank you so much for your time. And if anyone's got any questions or comments or thoughts or just wants to find out more about the podcast that Vix mentioned, then we'll have links in the show notes. Do post comments as well if you've got anything, and we'll do our best to answer those as well. So with that, I will say to everybody, thank you and goodbye.
Thanks a lot.